This is College Talk with Dean Aldemaro Romero Jr., a weekly program exploring the lives and work of the people of the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences at Baruch College.
Hello, everybody. Dr. Carl Rollyson is a native of Miami, Florida. He obtained his bachelor's degree in English from Michigan State University and his master's and doctorate also in English from the University of Toronto in Canada. Today, he is a professor in the Department of Journalism and Writing Professions in the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences at Baruch College. Welcome to College Talk, Dr. Rollyson.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Why did you specialize on biography?
Well, I didn't certainly start out with the idea of becoming a biographer. I wanted to be an actor, and I also did a lot of scholarly work. And gradually it occurred to me, although I was very interested in history, that my real concern, beginning with my work on William Faulkner, was in the characters' lives. And then when a former professor of mine asked me to do a biography of Marilyn Monroe for a popular culture series, I thought, well, let's try this. Let's try writing a narrative as opposed to scholarly articles, and I fell in love with it.
Okay, so my other question is then, since you became so interested in this particular genre, let me ask you what might be a tough questions or a curveball. What makes a good biography?
I think what makes a good biography above all is some kind of narrative. It doesn't actually have to be a plot as in a novel, but there has to be a kind of driving force. The biographer has to have a very clear idea of why he or she is telling the story. So however the biography is arranged, and it doesn't have to be chronologically, at least not in strict chronology, it nevertheless has to follow some kind of basic core or truth or pattern in the subject's life. I think that's what makes a good biography. What makes a bad biography, you didn't ask this question, but what it does is essentially the biographer keeps saying, look what I found. In other words, it becomes a kind of compendium, a kind of ragbag, a collection of data, which is very useful for readers, but generally tends not to be very good reading.
Now, when there is a particular individual on whom nobody has written a biography before, usually the first approach is to write a general biography, something that tells about the whole history, kind of chronological order, kind of things. But once the individual becomes better known, and because there have been some biographies already written,
yes,
then you tend to specialize in a particular aspect.
Right.
How do you decide that a particular aspect of an individual, maybe his or her politics or the times and all of that thing, is the right thing to do at that point?
I think it has to do a lot with my own background when I approached that kind of a subject. So, for example, with Marilyn Monroe, which was my first biography, even then, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, there had been many books on Marilyn Monroe. But as I looked at those books, I realized that they did what you were saying, that is, they give you sort of a general overview of her life and include some anecdotes and so on. But what I was really interested in, because I was trained as an actor, is what could be said specifically about her life as an actress. And so I focused on what I thought were her key roles, the way she prepared for her acting assignments, the kind of actors or coaches she dealt with, and what kind of methods she pursued, because there was a method to her acting. And that was something that the other biographers either weren't interested in or by training weren't equipped really to understand that aspect of her cinema performances.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because although almost all the attention on Marilyn Monroe has to do with her private life and
Sure.
her image and all that thing, most people don't know that she actually worked very hard
Yes.
to become a serious, respected actor.
Yes, and she did a number of things which were remarkable for the time. We're going back to the late 1940s. And I interviewed a journalist who interviewed her then and later became her press agent, Rupert Allen. And Rupert Allen said when he first met her, he saw her lifting weights. Well, there weren't any actresses in Hollywood lifting weights. He saw her jogging. There wasn't anybody jogging in Southern California in the late 1940s. That's much later. She was, in a sense, ahead of the curve in a number of different ways that are quite interesting.
Very professional.
Yes, very professional. Yeah, and very observant.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, that is peculiar about her is all these stories about her mental state.
Yes.
And all that sort of things. Do you think that had she been in a state that was less perturbed in certain ways about her mental health, she would have been a much more successful person.
It may be. I would say what's most important about Marilyn Monroe is her ambition, that she wanted to be a great actress, and this was an overwhelming ambition, and that she had this in common with all ambitious people. And what does that mean? Well, for me, what it means is if you're truly ambitious, above all else, it means you're never satisfied. That no matter how great, if you won an Academy Award or whatever, however popular you might be or successful you are as a writer, it doesn't matter the line of work. There's always this nagging feeling that you could have done it better, or there's yet something else that is a kind of challenge that you haven't taken on yet. When that happens, when you're that kind of personality, you're in a kind of constant state of dissatisfaction. It's not that you're not pleased with your work, but there's always something else you have to do to sort of complete yourself. And that puts, for some people, especially if you're an actress and everyone is looking at you, that puts enormous stress on you. And when you're put up on the big screen, everything about you is magnified in a way that people in other lines of work who are ambitious, like a writer, for example, isn't exposed in the same way. So when people talk about Marilyn Monroe's mental difficulties, I think you have to factor in not that she was mentally disturbed per se, but that given the profession she was in, it made it all that much harder for her to overcome the problems that she did have.
Now, when you decide to write a biography of someone, what goes through your mind in making that decision? Because you know you're going to invest a lot of time, many months at least, and effort in learning about that individual. So you kind of have to have some kind of a checklist of saying, okay, this person satisfies the kind of things I want to do regarding the biography of this individual.
That's right. And I think for me, there have to be a couple of important factors here. One is there has to be something about this subject's life, whether there have been other biographies written of the subject or not, or even if it's the first biography. There has to be something about their background that I feel uniquely qualified to identify with and discuss. And if there have been other biographies, I have to be able to look at those biographies and say to myself, yes, there are even some good books here, some good biographies, but there is some aspect, some crucial aspect of the subject's life that hasn't really been fully revealed. The other thing I have to be certain of is, do I have enough material? And I only have to have enough material to tell the story that I want to tell. There are many biographers who say, well, this collection of letters isn't open to me, or this person won't talk to me. That really doesn't matter. I mean, I try to look at all the letters and do interviews if interviews are necessary. I'll do all the work that other biographers do, but I'm not particularly concerned with the things that I can't know or I can't get access to, as long as I can tell a story. For instance, in my biography of Susan Sontag, the subtitle book I wrote with my wife is The Making of an Icon. The only question there for us as co-authors is, did we have enough material, archival? Would we be able to do enough interviews with people to get the story we wanted to tell? Because there were lots of ways to tell her biography, but by giving it that title, The Making of an Icon, what makes someone Susan Sontag? Could we tell that story? And we determined very early that there was enough material to do that, and therefore it did not matter if so-and-so would not talk to us, if we couldn't get access to something else. And in that case, in Susan Sontag's case, I also knew that sooner or later that other material would become available. So first edition 2000, the revised updated edition 2016.
Now, to what extent it makes a difference that the individual that I are doing the biography about is dead or alive?
Well, I've done both. And there are some biographers who won't do anyone unless they're safely dead. And I say safely dead because if you do a living figure, that living figure may be opposed to your doing the biography, and I have faced that situation with Martha Gellhorn and Susan Sontag. Norman Mailer didn't oppose my biography, but he had an authorized biographer, so he was not that interested in cooperating with me, but he didn't get it in my way either. So for a lot of people, they will say, even some biographers would say, I would never do a living figure. And my answer to that is, we can wait until you think you have all the information, but in fact, you never have all the information. We're still finding out information about Napoleon, for God's sakes. So there's always new information. The question again is, what story do you want to tell? Do you have enough to tell your story? Because even if you think you're writing the definitive biography, I guarantee you someone's going to come along and rewrite your book.
But that's a very interesting observation, because actually when you talk about the definite biography, is there such a thing? Because sometimes critics write,
yes,
this is a definite
the
biography.
definitive biography.
But you say, for example, cases like Lincoln, which
yes,
has been the most biographed person in history,
right,
or John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
Sometimes you wonder, is there anything else, anything new that you can say?
Yeah. There is, because for two reasons. One, it's amazing. With my current subject, William Faulkner, I have new material that no other biographer has worked with. But the other thing that changes is time changes. In other words, a biography of Napoleon or Hitler or William Faulkner or Marilyn Monroe, how we view that person differs if we're living in the year 1980 or the year 2016. The culture has different things it wants to know. Look at the changes in women's history in the last 30, 35 years. That's made an enormous impact on how people look at actresses, how they want to look at certain subjects, how they're going to treat certain materials. And because there's a different point of view, they will find different material as well.
Okay. You also mentioned the term authorized biography.
Yes.
And I suspect that within that term, you will find things that are pure propaganda for the person.
Yes.
To others that basically there are sincere biographies that the people being studied in that biography basically check certain data and provided some information.
Right.
Do you find things within that spectrum happening all the time?
Yes, there is a spectrum of authorized and also unauthorized biography too. There are very different kinds of books that go under those two labels. You have the kind of authorized biographer, for example, who works closely with the family, and the family might even have a kind of veto power. Joseph Blattner, who did the first full William Faulkner biography, I've been reading his letters. I just came back from a Faulkner archive in which he says to people, now you let me know if you find this offensive, and I'll take it out. I would never do that. But there are many, many biographers who have done that. I tend to, and I've worked with the families of my subjects, and the first thing I say to them is, I want to interview you, I want to talk to you, I'm going to show you what I write, but it's my book. And if you find factual errors or even differences of interpretation, I'll consider them. But in the end, the final judge has to be me, or my book doesn't have any credibility.
And now that you mentioned unauthorized biography, came to my memory the probably most infamous case of an unauthorized biography, the one of Howard Hughes.
Yes, yes.
It was all bogus. I mean, it was
yes.
all fiction.
Yes, yes. There was a novelist, in fact, who went around saying that he had Howard Hughes' permission. He was interviewing Howard Hughes, and yes, he made it all up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one has to be careful with that.
Oh, yes.
The other question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to writing autobiography, I suspect there are good autobiographies and bad ones and hidden agendas and all that sort of things. To what extent an autobiography will influence you when you write a biography of that individual? Yes,
I've dealt with subjects who wrote autobiographies, like Lillian Hellman, for example. And I found in many cases, some people would say she lied, some people would say she misremembered, some people would say she had a different interpretation from other people. I have to go back and I have to look at the letters that she wrote about the episodes in her memoirs. That is, letters which correspond to the periods she was writing about, to see how, from our point of view, how truthful she is. The problem with autobiography or with memoir is it relies a lot on memory. It's not the same kind of research that a biographer does. And I could put it this way, I can tell you things about myself that nobody else can tell you. And that's why some people will say, well, you can't have a true biography because there are things the subject knows that the biographer can't know. On the other hand, I would turn it around. And I would say there are things the biographer knows that the subject of the biography can't know. And to make this concrete, it would be like if I could stand up in front of you right now and walk around myself so that I could see myself from all angles. I can't do that. I can only see myself from certain angles. So therefore, if you ask my friends, my family, my wife, whoever it is, they're going to give you a lot of different perspectives that I can't give. And I will tell, for instance, I could tell you a story about how I met my wife, and she would tell you, because I once told this story to somebody, and she corrected me. Because I had, in her view, I had misremembered thing, and I tend to credit her because she has a better memory than I do.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the memory part of it, because I remember once reading the autobiography by Luis Buñuel.
Oh, yes.
Who was a Spanish filmmaker. And in the preface, he clearly say, I'm not sure that all this is accurate. This is the way I remember it.
Yes, yes.
So here comes my other question. Do you get any insights when you read someone's autobiography, in the sense that not that this person is lying or misrepresenting on purpose, but what can you learn about the person in the sense of only remembering certain things, recalling certain things from certain viewpoints? How much do you gain in terms of insight of that individual?
Yeah, you learn a good deal that way. I'll go back to Lillian Hellman. In her memoirs, and she wrote 4 volumes of memoirs, she mentions that she had many lovers in her life. The lover that was most important was Dashiell Hammett. She was married once. That was not her most important man in her life. Dashiell Hammett was the most important. And through these different memoirs, she creates a wonderful kind of love story, lots of ups and downs, lots of drama. And what she has maybe less than a paragraph, a couple sentences about another man, State Department official who she was in love with, John Melby. Well, when you go and look at her biography, you realize he might not have been quite as important as Dashiell Hammett, but at one point he wanted to marry her. They were very close. I went and I interviewed him. He had letters. He was a very significant person in her life. And he gets 2 sentences and 4 volumes of memoirs. I asked him if he was angry. And very interesting. He was a very sophisticated man. He said, "No, I'm not angry," he said, "because she had a certain kind of story she wanted to tell, and I didn't fit the narrative that she was creating." I thought that was wonderful.
Excellent answer.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I was thinking about is when you go to a bookstore, always one of the largest sections is biography.
Yes.
Why do you think people have fascination about other people, about reading their biographies?
There are a number of different reasons. One reason a person reads a biography is because they admire that person. They want to read about Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King or whoever it might be. And they want to learn what made that person great. And they want to know about the whole process of becoming that person. And they're interested in success stories. Now, that kind of reader might pick up a biography of Martin Luther King, let's say, or another important figure, and learn certain things they didn't know that makes them disappointed in that figure. Sometimes they become disappointed in that figure, but sometimes they take it out on the biographer. There must be something wrong with the biographer. He's or she is harping on these things which I don't think are important, and that the biographer. So then they say the biographer is prejudiced or biased, and he might be, but on the other hand, you're learning things that come as quite a shock. Sometimes family members learn things about someone who they think they know very well, and then the biographer turns up other things that the family simply didn't consider. So that's one issue. Another issue is related to it is people, I think, they look for role models. Gee, I wish I were like this person. What would it be like for me to have served in World War II and have been General Patton or whoever the subject is? And they get a kind of, sometimes maybe a vicarious thrill in a kind of you are there feeling if the biographer is good and can recreate scenes and give you a real sound sense of that person's life. There are some people, and it's not so popular now, but it was very popular in the 1920s, debunking biographies. Some people really love to see that huge hero has feet of clay, that he or she is mortal. They made all kinds of great mistakes, and maybe they're not as great as you thought they were, and you sort of bring them down to your level. So I think that's a part of it too. And I think people read biographies simply to learn. I think it was Emerson who said that biography is teaching by example. that people want these examples. And Emerson was a great one for talking about the lives of representative men, as he said. Not women, men in the 19th century.
Of course. So now that you mention people who read a biography and becomes disappointed,
Mm-hmm.
has it happened to you that you decided to write a biography of a particular individual, and then during your research you find things that you really shock you?
Yeah.
Has that happened to you? Can you give
Actually,
an example?
actually, it hasn't happened to me. It happens a lot to biographers, where they start out just thinking the subject is wonderful. People often give the example of Lawrence Thompson, who wrote a multi-volume biography of Robert Frost, and that he started out as an admirer and by the end was quite critical of Robert Frost, and some critics felt was overly critical because it's like someone who falls out of love. Suddenly your idol has feet of clay, and then you become even angrier, as if you've been somehow hoodwinked, you've been deceived. In my case, almost all of my subjects, with a couple significant exceptions, have been what I call difficult cases. That is, going in, I already know a lot about the subject, often because they're well known, and I know I'm going to find things which they're not going to upset me because I already know about them, but that they're going to be difficult things to explain about my subject. So I certainly have faced that kind of thing. But usually, well, a history professor here many, many years ago kept saying, why do you pick these difficult cases? Because there is this assumption that biographers, when they write a biography, must in some way admire their subject. And my answer to that is no. I mean, I may admire my subject, but what I admire about them is that they're a good subject for biography. Hitler is a good subject for biography. What biographer wants to say, I'm an admirer of Hitler? You're not going to say that.
Well, along those lines, have you ever started a biography and then stop doing that particular biography, or at least that particular angle?
Again, I've been very, very fortunate. I know many people who have started and they couldn't get a publishing contract, or they did learn things or they didn't feel there was enough material and so on. For whatever reason, I've been very, very fortunate. Sometimes it's taken a year or two. With William Faulkner, it took almost 2.5 years to find the right publisher for the book. And I think a lot of people, a lot of biographers might have given up and said, no, it's time to go on to something else. But I have this, what I like to say is it's not so much confidence as I'm sort of deluded. I've deluded myself that I'm the one for this subject and that sooner or later someone's going to publish this book. And so I've been very lucky. I've done a dozen biographies. I've never actually started. I've considered certainly just, brainstorming about certain subjects and have decided not to. But I've never actually committed myself to, say, a year of research and then giving up. A very fine biographer, Justin Kaplan, did this. James Atlas also working on Edmund Wilson and then abandoned the book. They're very, very confident, very famous biographers who've run into that problem, but I haven't.
When writing a biography and finding a particular period of time of that individual for which you feel you need to get more insight, but there is not enough information out there, have you ever thought like saying, I wish I had a time machine that can transport me to that particular point in time?
Yes, I came up upon a very serious moment in my Martha Gellhorn biography when I really didn't have much information about her last marriage. I knew at that point I knew a lot about her and I knew a lot about her third husband, but I had no letters. I had nothing other than a few interviews to describe what this marriage was like. But I felt, given the overwhelming evidence that I had from previous periods of her life, that I understood what this marriage was like. So I wrote a chapter which was essentially a short story, the story of this marriage. And in the meantime, I was writing to biographers, some Hemingway biographers, because she had been married to Hemingway, and asked them, where would you look? And finally, one biographer, Kenneth Lynn, said, well, for Martha Gellhorn letters, I'd look in Bernard Berenson's papers in I Tatti outside of Florence. And I wrote to them. And they had a whole bunch of Martha Gellhorn letters, and even better, it was writing about her third marriage. So I went back. I went to Italy, looked through these papers, went back and looked at the short story. Essentially, it was based on some fact, but it was also highly speculative. And I was able to fill in the blanks. I didn't really have to change the chapter, but I had evidence for my suppositions.
And in fact, there was a movie about Hemingway. And
Yes.
that was
It's a great story.
Yeah, great story. My last question for you, well, I have two questions. The first one is, of the people you have written a biography of, who you never met, which one you really will die to meet and ask questions to that person?
Probably Marilyn Monroe. Yeah, there are certain key questions I would like to ask her about her relationships and about her acting that we just can't know. The great thing is that, again, here there have been hundreds of books written about Marilyn Monroe. Letters of hers, journals of hers in the last 10 years have suddenly been found, have been published. And we're getting some clues to the sort of the inside of her, to her mind.
My last question then to you is, you have been teaching for many, many years, and let's say that a student comes to you and says, Professor, I would like to become a biographer.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a word of advice. What would be that word of advice?
I think it would be the advice of any writer, whether it's a writer of biographies or not. Read a lot of biography, and I would probably suggest some titles, some different kinds of biographies to read, to think about, how biographers work. And most of all, I would tell them, take a look at the acknowledgments page to see how much work it is and what biographers say about how they learn things and what was difficult about the task, because they have to really understand the process of writing biography.
Yeah. Very well. Well, thank you very much to Dr. Rollyson about this very interesting conversation about biography and biographers in general. And next week, we're going to have Dr. Pablo Peixote of the Department of Natural Sciences at Baruch College, who will be talking about the life of the human cell. So stay tuned.
This has been College Talk with Dean Aldemaro Romero Jr., a production of the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences at Baruch College. All rights reserved, 2016.